Okay, hello. We're going to look at Chapter 3. I hope you like Black Sabbath introduction there. We're going to go to Chapter 3, Federalism. We're going to look at, we're going to define it. We're going to look at the constitutional basis of it. We'll look at intergovernmental relations today. And then we're going to try and understand federalism. So, let's go to the defining federalism. All right, so what actually is federalism? It's a system of government. Okay, and there's actually three systems of government in our world today that we can categorize. And federalism is organizing a nation that has two or more levels of power. So two governments share power. In our country, the United States, we have national government and we have state governments. Okay, and they share power. There's levels of authority there. There are also a unitary system of government, which means that all power resides in the central or national government and very little power, if at all, in the state or regional governments. And then a confederation, which is what the United States had in the Articles of Confederation, which the central government or national government is weak and the state governments are very strong. They kind of run things. Not too many countries actually have a federal system of government. I think there's only about 11 in the world today out of about approximately 190 nations. Most governments are a unitary system of government. There's very few confederations also. Okay. Let's look at why is it important. Federalism decentralizes our politics. There's a lot of opportunities for political participation in federalist society or federalist system because we have state governments, national governments, state governments, local governments like the city of San Diego, mayor, council members. You have city of San Marcos and all those other things that you can gives us a lot of opportunities to participate in political life. It also decentralizes our policies. Federal and state governments handle different stuff, different problems. A lot of times they interact, for sure, but they also handle different problems. Like the federal government handles, protection from invasion. Okay, the state militias may help, but the federal government offers that. Okay. Let's go to what is the constitutional basis of federalism. There's a division of power. There's and how they establish national supremacy, and then we'll look at states' obligations to each other. Okay, and so we'll see what the Constitution says about the division of power. All right, in the Constitution, like I said, there's a preamble, there's articles, and then there's the amendments. And Article 6, which organized the government, Article 6 of the Constitution states the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Laws of Congress are too, and treaties that Congress have ratified are supreme. Okay, so it's basically saying supreme law of the land is the U.S. Constitution. But the 10th Amendment to the Constitution says the power is not delegated to the U.S. by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. Okay, that means that the powers that are listed in the Constitution are powers by the national government, and that the states have other powers that aren't listed. Okay, so there's been a lot of Supreme Court cases, against the U.S. that used the 10th Amendment, saying that these powers aren't listed in the Constitution, so the United States government can't act upon that or can't do certain things. But that has been looked at by some Supreme Court cases, and we'll look at those in a few minutes here. Okay, so distribution of powers. Some powers granted by the Constitution. There's, think of this as a Venn diagram, and in the middle, the states and the national government has both the power to do what they can do. There's also some powers denied by the Constitution. Okay, granting titles of nobility. You can't have any kings and queens and dukes in the United States. Okay, a couple other things down there. You can pause that and look at that. Okay, so back to establishing national supremacy. The United States government has delegated powers, expressed or enumerated powers, we call them, in the Constitution. Power to levy taxes, power to start a navy, stuff like that. But in Supreme Court cases, they've kind of, gave more power to the national government. And it started early on in 1819 in McCulloch versus Maryland. It was actually about the national bank that the United States had. And Maryland tried to tax this national bank $15,000 a year. And the bank wouldn't pay it. The national bank wouldn't pay it. So Maryland, the state of Maryland, took McCulloch who was the bank's cashier, or whatever, took him to court. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they ruled that Congress had implied powers in addition to its enumerated powers. And really what that is saying is that they have powers that are necessary and proper to carry out their enumerated powers. Okay, kind of a weird thing there, but that's what the Supreme Court basically said, that they have implied powers that aren't listed in the Constitution, but they help them carry out their enumerated powers. Also, what established national supremacy is commerce power, the power to regulate interstate and intrastate, or interstate and foreign commerce, sorry. And one Supreme Court case early on, Gibbons versus Ogden, defined commerce very broadly. Okay, so it encompassed nearly every commercial activity. So that gave the national government more supremacy over the state governments. Okay, the Civil War was actually helped establish national supremacy because, militarily the national government asserted its power over the southern states' claim of sovereignty. So it kept the states together, the national government's military, United States military. So that helped establish national supremacy. And then the struggle for racial equality, the civil rights era, helped establish national supremacy. In Brown versus Board of Education, it overruled that earlier in 1896 Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson, and it overruled that, and it outlawed segregation in public schools, and that basically, pretty much started the civil rights era where, it outlawed discrimination in public facilities, buses, waiting rooms, stuff like that, lunch counters. Okay. Okay, this is somewhat important. In 1963, Governor Wallace made a stand at the University of Alabama to resist integration of the all-white school. Although federal marshals came in and basically, imposed federal law and said they need to have access to the school. So he lost. Okay, let's look at states' obligations to each other. Article 4, Section 1 of the Constitution requires each state to treat each other state's citizens nicely, basically. That's what it's saying. It's called full faith and credit. And if you went to the University of Arizona and you were driving and you still had your California license, they would accept that license. Okay? So it's basically giving you full faith and credit that Arizona citizens get, you get the same. Okay, extradition is another one. Requires a state to surrender a person charged with a crime in the other state. And states' obligations to each other, privileges and immunities. Requires states to give citizens of each state the privileges of citizens of other states. Okay, let's go on to the development of intergovernmental relations, which is basically federalism here. Okay, at first there kind of was a dual federalism. Okay, and we'll define that as the national government remains supreme within their own sphere, and the state remains supreme in their sphere. Okay, and each were responsible for some policies. Okay, kind of like a layer cake. Think of it as a layer cake. Okay, you had powers of the national government and powers of the state government. Okay, usually proponents would think of dual federalism as the national government's powers should be interpreted very strictly in the Constitution. Okay, very rarely, like no implied powers. Okay, but just the ones that are expressed or enumerated in the Constitution. Okay, cooperative federalism, which is what we have now, let's say. It's in which system of government, which powers and policy assignments are shared between the states and the national government. Okay, and we share a lot of stuff, like education. A lot of times the national government will come down with like No Child Left Behind, and say to the states, this is what we need to follow. We'll give you funding if you follow the No Child Left Behind standards and stuff. And sometimes states do it if they want the funding, which is very important for the states. And sometimes some states won't follow it and they don't get the funding. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Usually there's shared costs, federal guidelines, shared administration in cooperative federalism. A lot of times, though, you'll see unfunded mandates by the federal government, which really puts a burden on the states. Okay, cooperative federalism. You know, the states and the federal government kind of stayed separate up until the Great Depression, where the effects of the Great Depression really kind of made the national government and the state governments cooperate more. And you saw a lot of very big projects that the federal government and the state governments shared during the Great Depression. Okay, I think we're gonna end there, and we'll start a new one. We'll start a new one and start with devolution. Okay? Here's another little piece of Black Sabbath for you.